page from an album. He was an impossible person. He was terribly shy. He never knew what to say. And once he came to your place, he stayed far too long, sitting there in silence until you almost screamed with frustration. Then, at last, he would blush deeply and hurry away, leaving you wishing you'd thrown something heavy after him. And yet, at first sight, he looked most interesting. Everybody agreed about that. You might see him one evening sitting alone in a cafe with a cup of coffee in front of him. A thin, dark young man wearing a blue shirt under a small grey jacket, the sleeves a little too short. He looked like someone who had decided to run away to sea, or perhaps already had. He had thick black hair, grey eyes with long lashes, pale cheeks, and a mouth set as if he were determined not to cry. It was impossible not to feel sorry for him. And then there was his blushing. Whenever the waiter came near, his face turned bright red, as though he had done something terribly wrong. "Who is he?" people asked. "Ian French, a painter, very clever, they say." Several kind women tried to help him. One treated him like a child, asking if he ate properly and slept warmly. Another decided he needed romance and took him to cafés and dances, telling him how wonderful life could be. A third took him out at night to exciting places where people drank expensive drinks and someone had been shot the night before. None of it worked. He stayed exactly the same, quiet, serious, polite, and completely untouched. At last they gave up. He lived alone in a tall, gloomy building by the river. From the outside it looked romantic, especially at night. Inside it smelled old and unromantic, and the concierge sat all day in a glass cage on the ground floor. But his studio, high up under the roof, was spotless and neatly arranged. The cooking pots on the wall, eggs and milk on the shelf, books and a lamp on the table. By his bed hung a small sign that read, "Get up at once." He worked hard all day, cooked simple meals, and in the evenings either read or went quietly to a cafe. He kept careful lists of money, promising himself never to spend more than he could afford. It seemed nothing unusual would ever happen in his life. One spring evening, after rain had washed the air clean, he sat at the side window of his studio, eating prunes and throwing stones into an empty flower pot. The sky was soft and bright, and voices floated up from the street. Then, in the small house opposite, a window opened. A girl stepped out onto a tiny balcony carrying a pot of daffodils. She was thin, dressed in a dark dress, with a pink handkerchief tied over her hair. Her sleeves were rolled up, and her arms shone in the evening light. She spoke briefly to someone inside, placed the flowers carefully, looked at the sky, and went back in. She never once looked across the street. At that moment, his heart left his body and settled in the pot of daffodils. From then on, he watched her every evening. He heard her washing dishes, saw her hang a cloth by the window. She never sang or posed or laughed loudly. She always wore the same clothes. She always seemed to be talking quietly to someone inside. He imagined her life. A sick mother, no father, long days of work. He imagined their life together, too. Quiet conversations, shared silences, small arguments, little jokes. She was, he decided, the only person in the world his own age. But how could he ever meet her? Then he noticed that once a week on Thursday evenings she went out shopping. On the third Thursday he rushed downstairs and waited. When she appeared carrying a basket, he followed her. She went from shop to shop, careful and serious. At the dairy, he saw her choose a single egg with great care. The egg he would have chosen. When she left the shop, he went in, bought another egg, and followed her home across the flower market. Up the stairs she went. He followed softly. On the landing, she stopped and took out her key. At that moment, he ran forward. Blushing fiercely, but standing very straight, he said almost angrily, "Excuse me, mademoiselle, you dropped this." And he held out the egg. This episode was inspired by the short story An Album Leaf by Katherine Mansfield. It was first published in the British weekly magazine New Age in 1917. And now, let's go through some useful vocabulary you can take away from the story. Until you almost screamed with frustration. If you scream with frustration, it means you feel extremely annoyed because something isn't working. Example: when the printer broke for the third time, I wanted to scream with frustration. He would blush deeply. If you blush deeply, your face turns very red because you feel embarrassed. Example: he blushed deeply when everyone looked at him. At first sight. If something happens at first sight, it happens when you see someone or something for the first time. For example, she liked the new neighbor at first sight. Feel sorry for him. If you feel sorry for someone, it means you feel sympathy for them. Example: I felt sorry for him when I saw how lonely he was. Completely untouched. If someone is untouched by something, it means they are not affected by it at all. This adjective is also used to say that something hasn't been changed or spoiled in any way. Example: most of the East Coast remains untouched by tourism. At last they gave up. To give up means to stop trying because something doesn't work. Example: I give up, tell me the answer. His studio was spotless. If a place is spotless, it means it is very clean. Example: the hotel room was spotless. Never to spend more than he could afford. If you can afford something, it means you have enough money to pay for it. For example, I don't know how he can afford a new car on his salary. A girl stepped out. To step out means to move outside, usually for a short time. Example: he just stepped out of the office to get the mail. He held out the egg. If you hold something out, it means you extend it towards another person. For example, she held out the glass for some more wine. Before we finish, I'd love to hear what you think about today's story. Here are a couple of questions for you to reflect on or to share your thoughts in the comments. The girl never looks across the street, yet she becomes the center of Ian's world. What does the story suggest about how little we need to know someone in order to feel close to them? The story ends with Ian holding out the egg. Do you see this as the beginning of something new, or just a single brave moment. That's the end of A Page from an Album. I hope you enjoyed this quiet story and that some of the words and expressions will stay with you, whether you're watching from a distance, imagining possibilities, or finding the courage to act. Next time, we'll take a very different turn with A Fishing Holiday, an adapted retelling based on a story by Michael Gilbert. It's a darker crime story of patience, planning, and what can go wrong when you think everything is under control. Join me for uneasy suspense, a clever twist, and more English you can take away. Until then, happy listening!